everyone, to this Oracle Machine Learning Office Hours session. I'm Mark Hornick, your host for today's session. We welcome back our guest, Steve Chamberlin of Sensa Analytics, who will take a deeper dive into their use case with an OML example and lessons learned in applying Oracle Machine Learning to the problem of healthcare claims processing. This is a follow-up to our April 12th session, where Steve explored the challenge of efficiently processing thousands of medical claims each day. Steve has solid experience with Oracle systems over the past 17 years, leveraging the broader Oracle stack, and most recently being recognized with the Oracle Excellence Award for work in the healthcare industry. Before we begin, we'd like to get a sense of your primary objective for today's session. Are you interested in learning how machine learning is applied in practice, or learning how claims processing errors can be identified? Or perhaps you have another objective in mind. If so, please specify that in the chat. So we'll start the poll. So we have the vast majority here at almost 92%, learn how machine learning is applied in practice. Now it's bouncing with about 20% for learn how claims processing errors can be identified. So with that, I'll turn it over to Steve for our session, Sensa Analytics Use Case Deep Dive and Lessons Learned.
Thanks, Mark. Yes, this is Steve Chamberlin. Thank you for taking time to visit with us today. We've been really excited about a lot of the different work that we've been doing in healthcare with Oracle tool sets. So just to give you a little bit of background with Plano Orthopedics, they're based in the Dallas area. They have been providing services to patients in North Texas and actually beyond, several other states, for a little over 40 years now. And what they've been working on and growing is the ability to scale without having to continuously hire more people. They have multiple systems. They've added new doctors. So there's always challenges that are going on, and I'll get into more of those in a minute. But the CEO has been very involved and is just really enthusiastic, to say the least, as far as the results. For us at Sensa, we've been working with Oracle systems for about 6 years now. We have been focused primarily on the healthcare industry, and we have been recognized, as Mark was saying, with the Excellence Award, mainly for the work that we did in healthcare. So we're really excited about that, and we want to continue more. So this is one of the ways for us giving back, is being able to help explain and show how others might be able to use some of these same tools. In health facilities, what we're addressing is how there's so much information, so much data in multiple different systems in various locations that it just becomes overwhelming. And by that, I mean that some of our customers are spread out over actually a couple different states, as well as multiple different locations. They have multiple EMRs, or electronic medical record systems, electronic health record systems. Some of them can even be the same vendor, and having the data for their patients based off of a facility in a given area. So having all these volumes of data and trying to process them into one location is impossible without a tool set like Oracle. A combination of the Oracle databases, as well as the Oracle Analytics technology. Oracle database, of course, that it includes machine learning that comes standard and free with the application, as well as Apex, and we'll go into that in a little bit more. But what we're trying to do is allow the doctors to really be focused on better care for the patients. And the way that happens is simplifying the presentation of all of this information for the administrative team, as well as the doctors, so that they understand how the practice is doing overall. And so that's what we're providing by using a mix of machine learning and analytics for some of this process. And what we're talking about today is revenue cycle, which is the processing of claims.
Indeed. Okay. So for our second poll, let's get a sense of our audience today. We want to understand your role or roles within your company. And so do you consider yourself a data scientist, a machine learning engineer, maybe a data engineer, a healthcare revenue cycle specialist, or some other role? It's multiple choice, so choose all that apply. And if you have a different role, feel free to add that in the chat. All right, so we're seeing about a third for data scientist, a third data ML engineer, about 20% for data engineer, and we have about a third of saying that they are something else, and nobody's specifying what that is quite yet. But all right, so pretty evenly balanced among those, but we don't have any healthcare revenue cycle specialist. All right, well, thank you for that poll, and back to you, Steve.
So in that challenge, what they have going on is that there is always a battle for getting everything processed from a claims perspective as quickly as possible. There's constant changes by the federal government as far as what are the different diagnosis codes, procedure codes, requirements for being able to get a procedure paid. And then each individual insurance company, as probably most people know, there's multiple insurance companies, but within insurance companies, there's multiple plans. So as you're going through and choosing your benefit plans, there's tens of thousands of those throughout the US that any given facility needs to manage. And so that becomes a challenge to make sure everything is done correctly. The other thing that's happening at Plano Ortho, as well as our other organizations that we support, our other customers, is that they are growing. And that means more doctors, more facilities. That means more procedures, different types of specialties that they provide. So some may be just working on wrists, shoulders, elbows. Others may be working on brain and spine. So as they add those different specialties, that will change the mix of the different types of claims, as well as the different regions and how they are processed by these different benefit plans. So what they've been doing for the most part is using Excel spreadsheets where they're downloading the information from an EMR to analyze everything. With most systems, I mean, this is across the board based off of my experience, having been in the business for 20 plus years. Each vendor does a very similar function for a given area. In this particular case, managing claims. But the reporting side of it is very limited, and especially when you are talking about being able to grab that information from multiple systems. So the only way to be able to do that well is either manually doing that and spending hours and actually days in some cases gathering that information and putting it into spreadsheets, or you have Oracle that you can pull that information all into one place. And so with that being said, the biggest challenge is the volume. So as there's more and more patients that are being seen, in some of these cases, a coder or someone that is actually working within the claims department getting these processed, they have less than a minute per claim to make sure everything is correct and get it sent out. And that even includes if there's even any denials and getting that information back again, and then making changes and fixing it. So the time is very limited. There's compliance officers involved in the process. Compliance officers are responsible for making sure that all of these procedures are followed in a procedure and process being that the doctor has signed all the documents, that the right procedure code and its modifier. So procedure codes can have modifiers that are based off of, has this been done on the right side, the left side, or both? And based off of that and those diagnosis codes that support it, you have to have all these different pieces in place to make sure that that's being followed correctly. Another example, and one that we're going to be going over today, is the injections. So that is where you're looking at what type of injection it was, so that you're analyzing the diagnosis code and making sure that those modifiers are in place correctly. What this ends up turning to is how quickly you're able to get paid. So this has a direct impact on cash flow, as well as the reimbursement, total reimbursement overall. The more accurate you are, the quicker that you get paid, and being able to use the right procedure code and modifier. What that means is the amount of the reimbursement. So if you make an error in that process, you can still get paid. It will be marked by the insurance company as being fully reimbursed. But unless you know what that amount is and you have time to check it, you're just not going to be able to know, okay, yes, this is closed. Yes, this was fully paid, but did we really truly get fully reimbursed? So by being able to have machine learning to help in that capability of how often are different types of claims rejected versus accepted based off of these different diagnosis codes, we can help the healthcare organization know where do they really need to focus their time so that they're making sure that everything is done correctly and that they're getting fully reimbursed. Which brings us to poll number 3.
Okay, and this will be for claims issues experience. We're curious if you've had healthcare claims issues in the past, and if so, how long did it take you to get the worst of these resolved? The responses include, I've had no issues with medical claims payment. Less than a month, less than 6 months, less than a year, or more than a year. Seeing a bit of the tail there. So you've got the about 60% that have had no issues, a few less than the 6 months, very few on the less than 1 month. So it's pretty balanced on that side.
So to give you an idea of what's happening, we've put together a couple of diagrams that started kind of a top level and then drill down a little bit to make this a little bit easier to understand this process flow. And where in the process are we using Oracle and machine learning? On the left-hand side, you can see where we're pulling in the EMR. That's what I was talking about as far as the electronic medical records, and processing that through billing or practice management system. That is involved then with a coder or person in revenue cycle to make sure all that information is gathered, processed, and then that information is sent off to a clearinghouse. This is where we're interjecting Oracle machine learning. So in this first process, what we're doing is helping to make sure, based off of previous results, how likely is it to get processed based off of the different combinations that are included within this particular claim. Looking at the different procedure codes, as well as primarily the modifiers as well, making sure that in some cases, unfortunately, the doctors will make a change, resubmit a claim, and if you accidentally submit 2 claims for the same patient for that same visit, they'll just deny both of them. And then what that means is that will be denied for at least 30 days, probably most likely longer, because of the entire cycle. So what we're doing is scrubbing those claims based off of some of these denials that have gone through this process, so that before they actually get to the clearinghouse, the revenue cycle department can actually make some corrections. And then as they come back, this is phase 2, is we're also going to be using machine learning to be able to double check and feed back into that initial scrubbing process. Did anything get denied that, based off of our previous filings and what we've set up in machine learning and the analysis, that there's something new that's been involved? What will happen is an insurance company will make a new requirement for a procedure for getting reimbursed. Sometimes that gets communicated right away, sometimes it doesn't. And this will allow the coders and the compliance officer to understand when is something starting to fall off track and being able to have alert off of that, looking at some of that classifications of where those should be accepted and they're not. That translates directly, as I was saying, back to payments and how quickly and how much that they're actually being processed. So as we're going through this process, what we're doing is we're using Oracle Autonomous Database for gathering all this information, using it for machine learning, and then it goes through to different apps that are using Apex or to dashboards or reports in Oracle Analytics to understand what's going on. And that's one of the lessons learned for us, and that we'll like to share, and we'll touch on this a little bit later, is why it's so important to know your audience. And the tools are very valuable, give you a lot of insight into the data and what's happening, but you really need to simplify, transform that information into usable data graphs based off of each different role. And we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. So getting into more of the details side of it is we have information that's coming in that is using different codes, local coverage determination, LCDs. So these are the different documents from the insurance companies that are saying, here's for a given procedure, for a visit for a patient, if they have these diagnosis codes, here's the different procedures that will allow and we will pay for, and what are all those different requirements, like the modifiers and additional attachments, whatever the case may be. And then we're also pulling in that information from the practice management and the electronic medical record system that we were talking about before, bringing that into the data warehouse and then using machine learning to understand how that's being used, what's typically rejected or accepted, and then being able to put those into different dashboards and reports so it's highlighting exactly what's going on. So as we are talking about this, different pieces of data, we're talking about some very large volumes on 1, 2, 3, actually 4 or more systems with all the same information from different facilities that these revenue cycle departments are trying to centralize to be more efficient. So instead of having multiple teams at each location, building experts at a central location to be able to use this. And so what we're doing is we're refining that data into just a subset of tables and columns for the number of rows. So instead of going through and processing 28 million rows per day and trying to look at all that information from a revenue claim standpoint and all those different procedures and transactions, is simplifying that down to 800,000 to really be able to focus on what are the issues. And so within there, we're again taking that down to a single set of data that is simplified, brought into one process, so that as we're looking at the different diagnosis codes, like I was mentioning, and looking at those specific customizations, then we're using machine learning for helping us with that process. So where we're taking this a little bit differently than the last session is really trying to drill down into and actually show you how we're using machine learning to do this. So let me jump over to our machine learning demo that we've set up to walk you through one of these models. So as we're going through this, as far as the first section, what we're doing is we're pulling the information that we need, and we're only looking for 2 different procedure codes just for this demo. For in real life, there's between 20 and 30 different procedures for injections that we're looking at. And then all the different diagnosis codes based off of that. So the reason why there's so many is it depends on the type of medicine being used, the location within the body that it's being done. There's a lot of different factors that go into which different procedure code is being used. So within here, what we're doing is we're just pulling the data from and visits from our data warehouse and being able to pull that into a temporary data set so that we can have those all in one place. And so as we run a select statement to be able to see all those, we can actually see, okay, here's what's coming over in those visit IDs and those different procedure codes. The other reason why we're doing this as a demo, of course, and looking at a subset of the data is because of HIPAA rules, so patient confidentiality. So we're slimming this down even more than what we typically do in a normal environment, just to make sure that we keep all the patient's data confidential. Okay, now we get into the meat of machine learning with Oracle Machine Learning OML. And what we have done is refine this into an a priori model algorithm to be able to look at these. So we have looked at it and tested with a couple different versions of OML. For anybody that's ever looked at it, there's a huge volume of different algorithms that is baked into Oracle's tool set. So with us, with trying to go through and look at this, what we're doing is, and the reason why we chose a priori is because we're specifically looking for those associations of the different accepted, rejected within the procedures and diagnosis codes of what's getting processed. And so within here, we have been changing around and identifying what are some of these different rules and confidence levels. So the confidence level is going to give you a big impact on the volume of data. And I'll actually show that here of what that means by changing that from a 70% confidence down to a 10% confidence of what data that you're going to be getting. So as you go through and set your different values, there is another rule actually that I want to mention, bring up, was the rule length. So in this particular case, we're using 3. That's because we're just looking at 2 different procedure codes in this particular case, and if they've been rejected or accepted. So if you're going to be looking at more rules, more possible different kinds of outcomes, that will play into what rule length that you're going to be using. So in this particular case, what we're going to do is we're going to switch this over to that confidence of 0.1. And it's just as simple as pressing the button so that it will actually run that script. What it's going to do is it's going to go through, load, and run those different settings into your tables within the database. In this particular case, what we're doing is we're running that into the autonomous data warehouse so that it's actually available for the next set of data. And what we can do is we can see here, it was set at 0.7. We're going to rerun that. Now it's at 0.1. So hopefully that was clear. We'll go back and rerun this again just to make sure. And then be able to see all of your other values, and as I was mentioning, the rule of 3 here. So what that then does is allow us to look at what are our results based off of these different procedure codes. What was the diagnosis code that was associated with that? Was it accepted or rejected? And then being able to identify the number of items in each one of those cases. So as we're going through that is just being able to run each one of those statements so that we can make sure that we have the latest information. So when we're using this, we're going out and grabbing the latest data. We do pull this information only twice a day. So we're pulling that over so that we get relatively current information based off of how they're using it. And that's for Plano Orthopedics. For other customers, we're running it at different intervals based off of how much processing is being done by the different teams. And then finally, what we're doing is we're getting down to running some SQL so that we're looking at our test for that different association. And so we'll run that paragraph again. And so it's not necessarily easy to tell. I'll point this out next time. One of the ways to be able to tell the volume of data is looking at the slider for your little bar to be able to see, okay, here's all the different results from the factors that you're using in this process of what's the confidence that it's going to be accepted or rejected for those particular procedure codes and diagnosis codes. So if we go back up again, we can start the process. And this is literally part of what we had been doing, is going through and changing these different factors based off of the type of data and what we were looking at to understand which association rule was going to be the most accurate for what we were processing, and being able to say what is the right volume of results that we're going to be able to get to be able to understand, okay, is this giving us enough of the rejected and accepted values so that we can actually understand how accurate the model is and being able to review the results with the end users. So again, finally being able to go into say, okay, what's the final result? And by being able to change that to a 70% confidence level. So being able to say, okay, here's the results from changing that from a 0.1 to a 0.7. So with all of that being said, that's why we were using some of the results that we were. So let's pop back over to some of the lessons learned. So, and just so that everybody can know some of the different settings, and as a reminder, we did include a screenshot of what some of those settings were so that you can understand which algorithm that we were using and the confidence levels that we were talking about for those different procedure codes. So finally, bringing this back around to what that end result is for the customers, what we're doing today now is a couple different things. So one of the nice byproducts of this, but we do have a listing of the different scrubs that are currently in production. What that translated to is a checklist now for less senior, so a junior person that they've hired to be able to go through and say, okay, does everything look correct? Do we need to check anything? So right now, those are primarily just messages saying, okay, here's something that you need to look at. Where we're moving to, so we've already done this in a couple places, is using prescriptive messages to say, okay, if it's this level of a warning, based off of those different outcomes, that confidence, what should you go look at? What are your next actions? So that we're really trying to automate that process. The next thing that we're trying to do is, and actually we've got this complete now within just actually about the last week or so, that instead of giving them a list of here's all the alerts, here's everything that's wrong, now we have a new and improved version that is being able to say, here are the only things that you need to look at. So the way the compliance officer wanted to be able to double check everything is not only just to go through her current process and compare based off of what she's familiar with, but then also just validating that the results are correct. So she wanted to see everything. Anything that was possibly an issue that needed to be fixed, she wanted to see it. Now this is a very small subset. So there's only about 4 or 5 things that end up popping up each day. And those are then refreshed on those cycles that I was talking about, so that when they get them fixed, it's off their checklist and they're moving off to something else. And so some of these reports, of course, there's no data. I mean, there's nothing there. There's nothing for them to fix. They're getting better and better at being able to do this. And finally, in the case of the injections, color coding that to be able to say for this number of injections. So that's another factor that is part of this process, is how many injections were done for that individual for that day. And based off of the diagnosis codes, which body part was it? Was it left and right, or were they both done in just one arm or one knee? What that does is then translates to those modifiers and being able to say, okay, based off of this coding and what you said, what's the likelihood that this is going to be rejected or accepted, and being able to put those out and color code those into the different orange, lighter color, and red, to be able to say, okay, here's how likely that's going to be rejected and that you need to go check that. So this is really simplifying down that process. And again, this has been now, instead of 20 or so different items, now this is down to just 5 to 10 at the most different things that they need to look at on a daily basis, based off of the likelihood that that's going to get rejected. So what do we see as some of these benefits? I think I've touched on some of these before, but just to clarify, we love the autonomous database, the autonomous tools. What this allows us, as well as the SMB healthcare market, is not having a DBA that's constantly monitoring this, having all the tools in one place, in one tool set, not having to jump around from different vendors, let alone that, just being able to look at one location to grab your data, be able to process it, push it back into tables that can be used for other reporting. And the OML feature set is very, very comprehensive, almost overwhelming. And this is where you will spend a lot of time right up front. And that's what our data scientists did, is looking at and testing some of the different AutoML classifications, associations, to see what was the better results based off of that feedback and coming back with it. The other part of that is also the ROI. So they've more than paid for this project just within the first couple months. The other thing that I was mentioning is they have an individual, the compliance officer, that's been doing this for over 20 years. So of course she knows everything like the back of her hand. She doesn't have to go look up rules, where if, again, the whole, Mack truck theory, if she's gone, finding somebody that could do that same kind of thing is going to be nearly impossible. In healthcare, just like in a lot of the other industries, they're having a hard time finding the right people and being able to keep them productive. By having a tool like this that walks them through what's wrong and what that they need to do at any given point, is a huge value add. So this is actually our second iteration of using machine learning with healthcare for revenue cycle. The first time we were way too low a level. When we were working with the revenue cycle team, we were going through machine learning results, going through the process, how is this getting set up? And it was way too much information for them. what we did on the second iteration is basically 1 and 3 is simplifying, so that what you're doing is you're just taking those confidence and accepted, rejected results and translating them, transforming them into just color coding, to be able to understand what is good and what's bad, what will get processed correctly, and what will probably need to be looked at and changed so that it doesn't get rejected the very first time out. Number 2 is just knowing the data. So as I was mentioning, we have quite a few different tables, multiple different sources, the procedure codes, diagnosis codes. I mean, all this different data that we're trying to refine. So being able to understand that is paramount. It can't be somebody that's just coming in that's a data scientist. In this particular case, it needs to be someone that understands the industry as well as the data, and being able to use basically a team approach in some cases for looking at what is the different data and what's the result. And then the third, like I was saying, that goes back into simplifying, but really knowing your audience. With Plano Orthopedics, one of the items that I mentioned was the CEO being very enthusiastic, and he's very involved. He rolls up his sleeves when he needs to. He doesn't understand all the coding aspects, but he needs to understand how well everything is working at a high level and making sure that it's hitting his goals of being able to move tasks away from that valuable compliance officer resource to more junior people to be more efficient as an organization. One of the greatest compliments we just got within the last couple of weeks was from that compliance officer. So this process started about 3 months ago or so, 3 to 4 months ago. She was very skeptical. Like I said, she's been in the industry a long time. She's seen a lot of these tools come and go. Just within the last couple of weeks, she said, "This is great." So this was the quote: "This is allowing me to be more productive because I don't have to spend my day digging through reports to find errors." So she knows that this is not trying to replace her. This is making her job easier. It's bringing in better results for the organization. So, which translates to better care for the patients, because the doctors don't have to go through and understand, okay, why is it taking so long for my claims to get processed and paid? So this is up and down the line a better thing. And this goes to that last, bringing this around full circle from the challenges that we were talking about before, is that it's reducing coding errors by being able to look at all these different factors and being able to say, okay, what's the likelihood that this is going to be rejected? Automating that process. So nice byproduct was all of these different scrubs translating into a step-by-step daily task that anybody can do, and then be able to go up and make corrections. And then finally being able to improve the quality of what's happening and the cash flow, the accuracy of how quickly are we going to get paid and what is that going to be paid. So again, AR within healthcare, so accounts receivable in those 30, 60, 90, 120 days, that's just as important in healthcare as anywhere else. And so this has made it definitely a huge impact. The CEOs said multiple times, different compliments. Ones that stick out is that you're worth your weight in gold. So this has really been a very, very positive experience in multiple different ways. So hopefully this helped you understand how this works, what the results were, how the product works, at least just one of the examples and algorithms that we've chosen. But if there's any questions, we'd be happy to answer them, and just thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Great. Well, thank you, Steve. It's great to hear about your success with machine learning, and thanks for this deeper dive. Hearing about the details and lesson learned in this healthcare claims use case is great. So thanks everyone for joining us today, and until next time, take care.